Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Todd Pultz. Thanks for being on the show, Todd.
Hey, thanks for having me, Whitney. Excited to be here with you.
Yeah, honored to have you on the show, Todd. A little about Todd, in case you don't know him. And he's a multifamily investor and flipper from the state of Ohio, home of none other than the Buckeyes. Currently with over 100 doors owned, dozens of successful flips, and some mistakes along the way, he personally manages these properties and projects while still working a full-time job as a VP for a large security firm and while keeping his princess wife happy. So welcome to the show, Todd. I'm grateful to have you on. There's so much just right there that we could talk about. And while working full time and making this happen, I love talking about that because I've experienced that myself. And I know so many of the listeners are pushing to do the same thing and to get into this business. And you know, you've had real estate success and while working full time and in a family as well. So, but give us a little more about you, Todd. I know you have a story you want to share as well. And tell us that, and then give us a little more about maybe your current how you got into your real estate business and why. And then let's jump into your superpower.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you started off mentioning my wife. Otherwise, I would have been in big trouble, Whitney. So thanks for doing that. A little bit about me. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, actually a suburb of Dayton right on the border called Riverside, Ohio. Kind of a typical story that I hear from a lot of guys that jump in trying to create wealth with real estate. I grew up in a trailer park, fairly poor, with a dad that jumped around job to job. My mom only made it through 8th grade. She was a stay-at-home mom. And, we didn't have a lot growing up. Along the way, I didn't have anybody in my life that taught me about finances or even managing a checkbook. I didn't even know how to set up a checking account, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, I decided I wanted to do something a little bit better and decided to go to college and get my criminal justice degree. Moved into my career in law enforcement as a police officer. From there, at some point along the way, I jumped into corporate investigations with a large retail organization. And right around 2013, I decided to jump into real estate. And since then, we've done dozens of flips. We own hundreds of doors in the Dayton market. But really, the reason I jumped into real estate, I don't think it was accident, but I can tell you the moment that I realized that I wanted to do that, when my wife and I first got together. Again, I told you I grew up without really anybody teaching me about finances. So, 10, 11 years ago, if I had a 500 credit score, that was a really good day, right? When my wife and I were first together and I was at her house, I was going through foreclosure on my first home. My house was getting foreclosed on. And as we were sitting there watching a movie, I had some tow trucks show up in the front of the house, and they were hooking up my truck, right? They were repoing it. And my wife looked outside and said, "What are they doing?" At that moment, we kind of had to, come to terms with the fact that I wasn't doing good financially. Although I had a good job, it was paying good. I didn't know how to manage any of that. And really the embarrassing part, her mom and dad lived right across the street from us, right? So I had to make up the story that I had the maintenance, techs come pick up the car they were going to work on it that night. But it was kind of at that moment where I said, you know what, I got to change. I got to do something different. I need to start thinking about my family and the family that we were going to build, and how do I build that wealth? And that's really when I made the decision to jump into real estate. So I had about $10,000 in one of my retirement accounts, and I called now my boss, one of my business partners, but he's been my mentor along the way. And I said, "Hey, I got 10K. I want to do something in real estate. If I find us a 4-unit apartment building, will you give me 10K also? And let's go in and buy this building." I think he kind of laughed and he said, "Where are you going to find a $20,000 4-unit apartment building that you don't have to put, crazy amount of cash into rehab?" And I said, I don't know, but I'm willing to try. So we spent about the next, 2 or 3 months trying to find a property, and found a property that was listed at like $65,000, $70,000. Wasn't in bad shape. It was in the C-class neighborhood. And I said, I might not be able to get for 20K, but let me practice my negotiation skills. So at the end of the day, we found it was a guy that had it on land contract from a guy out of Iowa who bought it on auction. Horrible relationship. He had never paid the actual owner a cent. They were behind taxes. And at the end of the day, we gave the land contract guy $1,000 to go away, and we gave the actual owner $19,000 to pay the property off, get his money back in foreclosure, and pay his taxes. So we ended up getting into that deal for right at $21,000. My mentor at that time put 12K in to rehab it. I took him out in about a year, and that was my first property, and that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. got into real estate. I mean, you were going through a hard time there. You were being foreclosed on. Your vehicle was getting towed. What an impression on the future in-laws and your future spouse. You can't remember if
Yeah.
she was your girlfriend at the time or what. But wow, and that was a turning point, right? I mean, you said, okay, I've got to make a change, and it's unfortunate a lot of people, they don't make that decision, right? They don't make that decision and have a turning point like you did. But look at you now, and it's just incredible. And you made that happen. You made that deal work. And give us some more details about that project. And then I'd love to fast forward into kind of where you're at now, and maybe a few things along the way that helped you to build the business that you have now.
Sure. So that project was, I'd read, and I'm not a big reader. I don't read books. So everybody that says they've read Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is almost everybody, I'm going to confess right now, I've not read it. I've saw bits and pieces of it, and my friends tell me everything that's in it. So I feel like I've read it. But, I just immersed myself with the internet and talking to people. And quite honestly, my mentor at the time had a few rental properties. But the thing that he had that is really hard to find was he is probably the most incredible entrepreneur I've ever met in my life. One of the smartest guys, but he had a security company. He's had multiple companies that he started. Just a very successful guy. So he helped me in that real estate piece right then. But neither one of us really had a big connection with rehabbing or managing, multifamily properties. Although he had a couple of them, but we just, we found the right crews to come in and knock it out for us for $12K, which was just really turning one apartment. And then I just learned. I learned how to operate. I learned how to be a manager. I talked to people. I talked to friends and family. And I didn't reach out to any other investors because I didn't really understand networking at that time. And I just asked people, like, how would you want to be treated if you lived in an apartment? Like, what do you expect your landlord to do? What do you expect the owner to do? And we made some mistakes along the way. Matter of fact, one of the biggest mistakes and losses that I had was kind of right after that. So I was on top of the world. I was like, look, I found this property for $20,000, right? Like, we're killing it. And I didn't know how successful that property would be until 2 years ago when I finally sold it to fund my wife's in-ground pool. But at that time, I was feeling like, man, we can conquer the world, right? And I found a beautiful 6-unit building around the corner. And it was almost completely rehabbed. There was a guy who actually was selling some drugs in the apartment and unfortunately was murdered in one of the units, but he had 4 out of the 6 to the hill, just absolutely remodeled. It was going to be beautiful. And same thing, we got that under contract for the back taxes, which were $20,000, and we were only going to have to put about 30,000-40,000 into it to get it ready. The biggest mistake that we made was we closed on a late Friday night. Completely forgot to put insurance on the building. Monday morning, I'm waking up to go to the building and watching the news, and I see a building, right, apartment building on fire, just kind of burning to the ground, and that was our building, and we didn't have insurance on it, so that building went. It was a complete loss to us, and that was a huge lesson. So very quickly within that same year of feeling like I was on top of the world and that I could do this, we got hit with that, right? So we could have made a decision at that point to either, tuck tail and run away, or, like, let's suck it up. And I'll tell you, my wife at the time, that was not an easy conversation, letting her know that we just burned $20,000. So, but I do have a real quick story about you, Whitney. And I think sometimes on podcast, we hear a lot about the guest. And one of the things that I wish we heard more on some podcasts was about the actual person put on the podcast. And for you, you're probably not going to remember this because you talked to thousands and thousands of people. But at the end of 2019, I went to the conference out in Colorado. And you were there. You were one of the presenters, if you remember. And we met for a brief moment. And I'm not going to make this like a love story, but we met for a very brief moment, right? And I knew right away, like, hey, this is a genuine dude, a guy that, you should really listen to. And I listened to your story on stage, listen about the adoption and your wife. And at one point, you figured out that you needed to maybe start looking at partners and networking. And when I came back to Ohio after that conference, I took a deep look at myself and I said, what am I not good at? Like, what is the one area that I fail in? And for me, it was always staying to myself in real estate. I never reached out. I never networked. I never talked to anybody else in real estate. I just did it on my own. And that was it. But after listening to you that day and kind of your story and your journey and kind of seeing what you're doing, I thought, man, you know what? I need to make some changes. And networking just in the last, 6 months has become a piece of my everyday business and what I'm really trying to focus on. Not because I'm doing syndication or trying to raise funds. I think it's good for the soul, man. And one of the things people forget about sometimes is your everyday interactions and how much impact you can have on somebody. And that brief 2 minutes that you and I set beside each other at that conference and that presentation that you gave at the conference, you didn't know that, hey, Todd Pultz of Dayton, Ohio is sitting in the back of the room listening and hanging on to every word that you say. But you impacted me. You impacted me in a very important way. And since then, we did start a partnership with 3 people, one of them being my original mentor, and then 2 from Nevada. And if I would have never listened to you or heard your journey or heard your story that day, I would have never even thought about it. And I probably wouldn't have even began networking. But don't forget how much impact you have on people, Whitney, and I appreciate that.
Wow. Well, I'm flattered, Todd. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm grateful that you were there and that meant something to you. Grateful for you sharing that. I'm grateful that I know that, and that I was able to help you without even knowing it. So grateful for that, and that you've now partnered and now you've done some big stuff. I mean, since then, and so your superpower though is really become the project management piece, right? And you all purchased some properties that are like Class C or maybe in some harder areas and things like that. Sounds like you learned a lot, especially with insurance. I'm surprised you could even get lending or get a loan without insurance on a property somehow.
Yeah.
But learned a lot, and I'm thankful though that even through something like that you didn't quit. Right. I mean, you kept going forward. Like you said, we could have decided just to tuck our tail and run away from real estate. But I just feel like it's those people who, when things like that happen, because it almost happens to everybody at some time or another. Like there's things like that happen in business, and it doesn't matter if it's real estate or whatever it is. And you have to make the decision: am I going to tuck my tail and run away, or are we going to keep moving forward? And I feel like it's then that you really people's business start to move, it's the hockey stick, right? That's when they start to hit
Yep.
that. It's when those decisions are made. And it sounds like that's what you did. And I'm grateful to hear that. And so, it sounds like too that you're, during the project management piece is when, you're able to shine and you've become an expert in that field. Why don't you give us an example of a property, maybe one that we've already talked about, or another one where, it wasn't that kind of part of town, or it was a project that was really difficult and you had to really shine on the project management piece. And let's talk about some of those skills that you have and help the listener develop some of those as well, or maybe some things that you learned and whatnot going through a process, of an actual property.
Sure. I think there's a couple that, really kind of match what we're talking about. But, the first building was great. Second building burned down. But our third property was 31 doors split between 10 buildings on one street in a C-class neighborhood. A little bit of a rough neighborhood. Matter of fact, 10 years before this, the cops wouldn't even come in without 5 or 6 cruisers at a time, right? So it was a rough property. But this property itself, we worked the deal, and this was just one. My wife and I, we worked the deal and was able to get owner financing with 0 down. And we got into this property with 31 doors across 10 buildings. Rents were low. I mean, $300 to $350 per door were rents, right? Expenses were through the roof a little bit. Tenants were a little rough because there wasn't a real strict screening process done. But over the course of the next couple of years after that, and that's really where a lot of our focus was for 2 years, was turning that property around, because we didn't have the funds and the teams to go do a lot of other big properties. But the rent roll at that time was like $8,000, right? Like that was the gross rent for 31 doors. So if anybody's a mathematician out there, which I'm not, you can probably very quickly figure out that that's not real great. But we turned it around. We did some updates. We started raising some rents up. We started doing some screening processes. We came up with some creative ways to put, positive tenants in there that we could hold on to. And we really just immersed ourselves in the business with being there every single day. Every day after I was done with work, I drove to the property. Every morning before I went to work, I went to the property. And we just try to take care of it. But that property itself was doing really, really well up until about May 30th of last year. And some of you may have seen the tornadoes that came through Ohio. So we're feeling really solid about this. Our gross rent rolls are really nice over at that property. Things are going well. And then last year, 2019, we had the tornado come through. And on that street, of about 18 buildings that are on that street, we have 10 of them. Now we actually own 12 of them. But the 10 buildings that the tornado hit just happened to be our buildings, right? Like the other buildings were untouched, but every one of our buildings got hit. We had about $1 million in damage. And that itself was, again, one of those situations like, what in the world do we do now, right? Like I had never done $1 million rehab. But from start to finish, I spent my time there. We worked with the insurance agents. I GC'd the entire project myself. I managed every piece of that rehab to save money. We came up with some creative ways to do that. Now, thankfully, this time I had some really incredible insurance, right? which also included rent loss for a year. So that made it a little bit easier. But we actually just completed that rehab on the final two buildings about 2 months ago. We're 100% occupied. We during that tornado also picked up two buildings right beside us for like $2,500 a piece, and had to stick some new roofs and rehab those. So we picked up an additional 6 doors. So on that street right now we have about 37 doors. There's 12 buildings, and the rent rolls cap just a little over $20,000 at this point. So we're what 4 years later, and this is a phenomenal property. I've had numerous people want to buy it. I'm like, man, I would love to sell it because we're at the top of the market right now, but how do I do that? Like, how do I justify to my wife, like, I'm going to get rid of our passive income that people just, are striving to get right now. But that was a huge project. So it was $1 million rehab split across 12 buildings, and we've done it.
Nice. Very nice. So what was one creative way that you had to use to get people in there, like you were talking about? And did you have to completely vacate the property, from the type of tenants that were there, or and how did you get people in?
So, one of the hardest things after the tornado was, as much as we tell people at lease signing, as much as we put the emphasis on them that, hey, you got to have renter's insurance. What we found was, out of our, 35, 36 tenants at the time, we only had 2 that had renter's insurance. They had nowhere to go. They didn't have any resources. So for me, luckily, we live about 5 minutes away from the property. So I literally stayed the night on the property in my car for like 2 straight weeks, because people were trying to loot, they're trying to vandal. We were, my law enforcement background, I just couldn't let that happen, right? So we had 20 to 25 people arrested. So I basically lived there. But one of the things that my wife and I did was, we also, we made sure we had coolers with food in it. We had coolers with water in it. We were trying to provide resources for them. And we had, 3 or 4 people that just had nowhere to go. So they ended up living in the unit. So we had to do some really emergency fixes to keep them living in that unit. And part of that was making sure that we're bringing the meals. And there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes into some of these things when cities are trying to get FEMA funds. So even though some of the buildings weren't completely destroyed, cities get their money. And I'm not saying it's a conspiracy or anything, but cities get their money from FEMA by having complete losses, not by having partial losses. So at one point, the city came in, even though I had tenants, like 4 of them still living on property, and there's some other buildings, they put a sign on every building telling everybody they had to get out because they weren't savable. But we still had buildings that were okay to live in that just needed some new windows or just needed some roof work. So we had to kind of work through that with the municipality, but it was tough. And even my little guy at the time, who was, he was 7 last year, him and his cousin are down there with a cooler down the street, passing out, candy bars and waters, and, just making sure people had what they need, but not just us, but it wasn't our property. And when my wife and I looked at that, we knew that nobody was going to do that for us. Like, nobody was going to come in when they were cleaning the streets. If you're a building owner, a property owner, and you have insurance, cities aren't rushing to help you clean up a street or helping you clean up a property. Like, they're going to the areas where they know it's going to be a little, there's going to be less resources. So we spent a lot of our time cleaning up around us because we knew nobody else was going to, and making sure the community around us was good. And it was, it was an interesting time, but, just to see the generosity of people and a community come together was really amazing, and really amazing to see that there's so many good people in this world that sometimes we forget about.
Mm. Wow. No, that's incredible. Incredible story that you cared about the tenants that much, and made a way for some of them to stay, in some very difficult times for them and for you all, during that. What are a couple things that you learned by being the GC and doing this remodel? A couple of ways that maybe you stayed organized and ensured, things that were going according to plan, and because you'd mentioned you'd never done a rehab like that before at that time, and so what were a couple of things that you really learned? I mean, obviously by being thrown to the fire.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, one of the fortunate pieces for us was we had done a bunch of flips before this. So I had we were keeping our a certain crew for us that was working really 100% for us almost on our flips and maintenance. So right at that time, we were in the middle of a couple of flips. So I had to pull those crews off to kind of come over. And those guys, they've been with us at that point for a year, and we're just so loyal and so dedicated. And they helped, really get through that. But I'll tell you, one of the hardest things was, like, I never had to pull a permit. I never had to pull an inspection. I never had to, file for those things. But when you have a natural disaster like that, the first thing they do is come in and shut off all the gas. They shut off all the electric. They do all that. So I had to very quickly learn, like, okay, what do I got to do to get a permit to get my gas back on? What do I got to do to get a permit to get my electric back on? even if it works, right? And those were probably some of the most valuable resources that I learned, was digging and figuring out how to do all that myself. And now on flips and even some of our most recent multifamilies with the partnership, some of those been a lot easier because I kind of got into that. But managing the flip was just staying on your people, right? I hear a lot of investors say, "Oh, my crew ran out on me," or my construction rehab didn't go well. And a lot of times it's because you're not there. But I was there every single day. Every morning we had a game plan, right? We met at 8:30 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning. We said, "Okay, what are we going to do today? Like, what is our goal today?" Staying on top of the contractors, keeping very organized notes about where we're at. We had a spreadsheet of every unit that needed inspection, where we were at with that. We kept very detailed notes about supplies and things along those lines. And that's the other piece, right? Is like, when you do a big rehab like that, how do you secure all your supplies without getting it stolen? And we battled with that a little bit. Thankfully my background is in law enforcement, and our security company actually specializes in C-class multifamily security in the area. So I've been doing a lot of that before we led up to this. But just staying organized with that and staying on top of the contractors, being there all day long, off and on, while still managing a full-time job. And luckily my boss and mentor at the security company is a phenomenal guy and allowed me the flexibility to do some of that. But it was a learning process, and I now that we're done, I couldn't be more thankful that I experienced that.
So why stay in? After you were being foreclosed on, your truck was being hauled away. You get into real estate, you have a successful deal. It's incredible. You made that, even the first one happen, and you made that decision, and then you get into the next one, it burns down, and now this one, tornado hits, and destroys majority of the buildings. You stuck with it, but why and how? What were a couple of things you had to work through, maybe mentally, and even with the family? I would imagine that people are family members. I know I experienced this too, but it's like, Todd, why are you still doing this? Let's go get a real job, like stick to what that, or something like that. What were a couple of things you had to deal with, and how you just stayed in mentally and made this happen?
Well, I think there's really three main points for me when I thought through it. And the first one, kind of silly, but my entire life I've been an athlete, right? Football, basketball, baseball. I still coach. I'm super competitive, right? So like, I don't want to lose, and that was one of the first components of it. The second piece of it was, especially with the tornado, I looked at it and I remember reading, giving an interview to one of our local newspapers, and I said, this is bigger than our property. This is bigger than our tenants. This is bigger than my family. This is about a community. This is about rebuilding a community and helping give strength back to that community. Say, you know what, we can conquer, we can overcome, and we can do anything that we want to. And I think for us, because we owned, over 50% of that street, like, people were looking to us for support and strength. They were looking to us to say, what, if they can do it, we can do it. And I really believe that if we weren't out there every single day knocking things down like we were, I don't know that the rehab in that area would have went as well as what it did. But just adding a little spark into the community, I think really helped. But, third, with multifamily, one of the things I think about all the time, and why I'm so passionate about our C-class type properties, is, in law enforcement and security, and being around this area my entire life and loving the city. You see, what's the cliche word, right? Slumlords, whatever you want to call them. You see property owners that don't care about residents, they care about the money, and they don't take care of their properties, which is why guys like you and I buy property so cheap. And for me, it's also about the people, right? Like, I read a blog or post on Bigger Pockets last night that upset me a little bit, hearing people talk about a C-class neighborhood. And these are some really good people that they want to live in that neighborhood, or maybe they don't have the income to move into a B or an A, but they're good people and they want to be taken care of. And if we can come in and be the right type of landlord and take care of these people, these properties can be super successful. But they just want to be respected the same way that we do if we're living in an A-class neighborhood. And being able to do it better than the last guy, myself and my partnership, that's what we want to do. Taking care of our properties and giving people a nice home no matter what side of town they live in, is a huge, huge passion for us.
What about, doing all this while working full time? Maybe give us a couple things I always like to ask you. How do you manage it? I had to work through that, and it wasn't easy. It definitely, just to keep everything going while working full time. And I know there's listeners who are struggling and dealing with the same thing. How did you manage family, or, and time with your wife, and, while also working full time and doing all these deals that you're talking about?
From a business standpoint, my real job, I think I mentioned earlier, but the owner of our security company is just an incredible guy, right? He was in real estate. He was my mentor. Now he's one of our 4 partners on our new real estate company. So I'm in a very fortunate situation, and I can't say that everybody's going to be in that situation. Everybody's going to have a different
Right.
ability. Mine is very fortunate, and I'm lucky that I have such an incredible individual that's in my corner, and I can also call my boss and my friend. So that's a little bit different than some people, but it's still hard. But part of that with, my job is being able to build an incredible team. And at the security company, I have a really incredible group of individuals that keep the ship flowing forward. And they know when the right time is to call me, when the right time is not to call me. And having that great team allows me the flexibility to be able to manage all kinds of things. And we have quite a few other projects going on our owner side, with some really incredible stuff that he's doing in real estate on his own as well. But as far as family goes, being very honest, there's times since, I got into real estate in 2013, 2014 that my wife was done. She was ready to call it quits, and we went through some really, really tough relationship times. I went through some personal struggles myself. We had some very strained years for a little bit. And it took a lot of soul searching to figure out what we needed to do to figure that out. And when I say we, I mean I, because it was my fault. She didn't do anything. She's not the one that went out and decided to jump into real estate and be gone all day long and work a full-time job and coach sports and do all that. There's a lot of management piece that goes to it. And being able to, hear my kids say, Dad, you work all the time. Can you just take me to a bike park tomorrow? Those are the things that push me to be more organized and be a better father. But I had to really figure out my time. Part of that was switching over to, software to manage all of our stuff. So now I do all of my management from an iPad. With a software company that I absolutely am in love with. And that reduced the amount of time that I spent on property by at least 75%. And that was probably the biggest game changer for me. But right now, every day, it is still a day-to-day struggle to make sure that I'm giving the correct amount of time to my work, and both jobs, but also my wife and my kids and other organizations that I get back to. And I think as long as we never lose sight of that and we continue to work on that and continue to know that that's a piece we got to struggle with, I think we can be okay. But oftentimes, especially as men, we're too proud to say, you know what, maybe I'm not being a great father, right now. Maybe I'm not being a great family guy right now. Maybe I need to reevaluate how much time I'm placing in each bucket, and figure out how to change that up. And I do that often. And sometimes it's because my wife slaps me back in the head and says, look, you're going back down that road where you're working 23 hours a day. Why are you up at 5 a.m. looking at properties on the internet? And now I just got my realtor's license actually. And she goes, what in the world are you doing? You want to be a realtor too? So, I'm just continuing to focus on it with her and make sure that I'm listening to her words and not dismissing her feelings and trying to really focus on putting everything together in a good time slot.
Nice. So I appreciate you sharing that, because it's real, right? I mean, it's a real struggle, right? You see a lot of guys who have success and you think, oh man, they make it look so easy, but they don't always tell you those stories like you just did, and appreciate you
Yeah.
just talking about focusing on your wife's words, also, and just taking time for that. So important. Well, Todd, what's a way that you've recently improved your business that we could apply to ours?
Yeah, so I think really two stick out to me. I just mentioned it, the software piece. Once you get to a certain point, I was going around to, at the time, 65, 70 units and hand collecting rent every month. I said, look, I'm going to show up on the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th. Yeah. And I hand collected every rent. And when I switched to the software about 6 months ago, I thought, holy cow, what was I waiting for? That was the best thing that I've ever done in my life. And I would suggest to anybody, even if you're small and you can't afford a big software, get one of the free ones and start managing that. But part of that's changing the culture and training your tenants how to use the software and not call you on the phone, right? And that has been a huge improvement. I'll tell you, one of the things that we've recently done, was, as the market kind of tightened up a little bit with us being able to find decent deals, and I'm sure you experienced that too, Whitney, we started trying to find creative ways to make some real estate things happen. And I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a suburb called Riverside, Ohio. And one of the things I do is I hang on every word that the city council says and the mayors and the city staff. And we know that they're all about economic development. So, several months ago, I started trying to work on those relationships with the local municipality and ask them, what do you want? Like, what do you want to happen in the city, right? Do you want new builds? Do you want some self-storage, which, by the way, they don't, but new builds and new construction and like, hey, what are you doing with all your zombie properties, right? Like, what land does the city own? And I think sometimes people forget that a lot of cities own a lot of pieces of property, whether it was a zombie property they took over, whether it was something they got kind of stuck with back in the day, or whatever it was. So we've actually started going to our local government in Riverside and talking about those pieces of land that they own, talking to parts of the city that they want to improve and enhance. And I'll tell you what I found is that it's really a great place for investors. And I maybe knew that because I've grown up there my entire life, but our local city council and mayors and city staff, they've just showed that they really want to work with us. And oftentimes they don't get investors come in and just sit down with them and saying, hey, how can we help each other? So I'm really looking forward to the future. We got some really cool projects going on in the city right now. Some stuff that's very unique, some land development and doing some other things. So I'm super excited about that. But really just excited to see where that relationship goes, because the city itself is just begging for investors to come in and they want to work with them, which is really cool. And you don't get that in every city. So we've had some great success there, some stories that I can't share yet, but hopefully sometime in the next several months, I'll be able to share with you on the side, Whitney. So
what's the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
Well, first of all, my family, my wife being supportive, my kids being supportive. I would say my wife's father is my best friend in the world. One of the most incredible guys I've ever met, that, he taught me a lot about how to be a man and how to manage my lifestyle a little bit differently and to be good to people. Whereas I didn't know that before, and I wasn't taught that growing up. So he's been really just super inspirational for me. And he doesn't know that, and he doesn't listen to the internet a whole lot, so he probably won't hear this. But my mentor and, still current boss, I told you several times here that he's just an incredible guy. But him and his family, I think you would appreciate them. They had 7 adopted kids, 3 of their own kids. He grew up in Mexico with his dad and mom, who were missionary, preachers, and they grew up down there with no utilities. So just being able to stick by his side and gain all the knowledge from him, that's been huge. So, really those things kind of coupled together, and having just incredible, phenomenal friends around me, that's been the biggest thing for me and being able to be successful.
How do you like to give back?
So my wife and I talk about this, and I think sometimes we forget some of the things that we do. But for her and I, we like to buy presents for the kids during Christmas time in our properties and some of the other properties outside. Our security company that John owns, we have a really cool program called Gift that one of our supervisors started, that we all donate into, that goes into some of the C-class neighborhoods and gives presents back and does things at Thanksgiving. And actually, during the tornado, we were able to use that program to help some of our employees that were affected by it. My wife and I give to a lot of local charities, the JCs, the youth sports programs, anywhere that we think is really deserving of it, that means something, especially in our local community in Riverside. We like to be a part of. I coach football, basketball, and baseball. And really the last thing for me that has become a new passion for me is I tell guys that work for me and gals that work for me that I'm teaching to be leaders in whatever business we're in, is I always like to tell them, like, never miss an opportunity. Never miss an opportunity to coach somebody. Never miss an opportunity to say hi to somebody. Never miss an opportunity to be good to somebody. But for me, in the last 6 months, and especially after starting to follow you a little bit, for me, never miss an opportunity means never miss that chance to give a new investor or a young person some piece of advice. Like, if I can tell one of my friends that wants to get into real estate all the mistakes that I've made along the way so that they don't have to make them, like, that makes me feel really good inside, right? And I think of one little story here recently. I was outside shooting some basketball, and one of the neighbor boys was out. He was like 10 years old, and he said, "Hey, Todd, I bet you can't hit that foul shot. I'll bet you $10 you can't hit that foul shot." And of course, me, I'm like, man, I don't miss. Like, I'm going to make this, right? And of course, I missed the shot. So for like the next week, he's like, "Hey, where's my $10? Where's my $10?" So I said, I'm not just giving him $10, right? I wrote him this 2-page letter. Now, mind you, he's 10. I don't even know if he read it. And I said, here's your $10 and here's your options, right? Like your first option is you go out and buy whatever you want this $10 and never see your money again. And then I gave him like 2 or 3 more options, like how to invest that, how to put that into an investment account right now, and then how to build on that until he was 18 years old. And like, how much do you have to put in a month to make it X amount of dollars? And then like one of the third options was like, hey, if you invest that and you get chores from your parents and they give you like $10 a week, which is $40 a month, and you put that in your investment account, when you're 18, here's how much it is. So now why don't you go buy a multifamily property? And let me tell you how to do that. And of course, the next day he's like, what was that letter? Like that was 2 pages. And of course he went out and spent his money. But for me, I really want to give back to our youth and give them the things that I didn't have growing up, so that they don't end up with their houses foreclosed on, their cars repoed, and having credit scores to be proud of like 500 like I did. So I really like to start that. And actually before COVID, I was working with one of our local schools, and we were trying to work on a program where we come into the vocational programs like instruction and start talking to the kids about how not just to be the hammer swinger, right? Like how do you start your business? How do you do real estate? And a lot of things that we talk about. So hopefully after we get back to school and things kind of clear around and get back to normal, we can start doing that a little bit.
Well, Todd, you have an incredible story, and I'm grateful to have heard it, and grateful for your kind words as well. It's just great to hear, just stories like yours where, it wasn't easy. After many obstacles, you just persevered in a big way, and now you're on the other side, and I would encourage you to tell your father-in-law just what he's meant to you and what he's taught you. I'm sure he would enjoy knowing that, but grateful just to get to know you a little better. I know the listeners are inspired, and tell them how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you.
Yeah, so I'm a really simple guy. Like I'm not on a lot of social media. I just started getting on Bigger Pockets, so you can find me by my name, Todd Pultz, on Bigger Pockets, and I've actually started enjoying on there. I do have an email address you can send to, which is BTTTI LLC, which stands for Bottom to the Top Investments LLC, which is my wife and I's company. So you can hit me on email there, or you're always welcome to shoot me a call, shoot me a text, doesn't matter to me. 937-478-6858.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.